keynote today is Dr. Yan Chow. Yan Chow is the medical director of digital health at Amgen. Yan is also a physician, and he's a pediatrician by training. And then he went into innovation at Kaiser, and we all know him as the innovation guy. So he knows a lot about innovation, and he's a wonderful person, and I call him a friend and a mentor. Amgen is the world's largest independent biotechnology firm, 18,000 employees, 21 billion revenues. They focus on oncology, hematology, cardiovascular disease, inflammation, bone health, nephrology, and neuroscience. He was the lead scientist for early development of therapeutic clinical trials and programs incorporating wearable sensors, medical devices, and mobile technology, including strategy development. So welcome, Dr. Chow.
It's past my bedtime because I'm old. Oh, there it is. Well, yeah, I'm really old compared to some people. Actually, you know, I used to be at Kaiser as a physician, and when I was at Kaiser, we considered pharma the dark side. And now that I'm in pharma, I have a total change of mind. So I'll talk a little bit about where I am, what I'm doing. When I first joined Amgen, which is less than 6 months ago, I told them, you know, I know nothing about clinical trials, and they took me anyway. So it was very, very good. I'm going to talk a little bit about digital health, which ironically is where pharma and health providers are coming together. And I'll tell you why it's coming together. The area of digital health, there's many definitions, but basically it's using computers to enhance and augment healthcare to patients. So for those of you who are not familiar, this is one of the typical pictures about how clinical trials work. So you start with basic research, drug discovery, then you go to preclinical, which I found out means animals. So that was good, I learned that. And then, because people kept saying preclinical, I'm thinking like before they get sick, or what is that? And then you have phase 1, which you have about trials that have tens of people, phase 2, which is hundreds, and phase 3, thousands. The average cost per patient enrolled in this trial, in these trials, is $10,000. So very, very expensive. And then finally, once you get approved, then there's phase 4, which is a population studies, the long-term effects and things like that. So one of the interesting things we're actually doing at Amgen, and you guys should keep this secret because it's secret, is that we actually just in the process of conducting our first totally virtual trial. No sites. You know, we have an investigator. Patients don't need to come in. It's global. It's United States. And it's working, which is very interesting. We're using Apple Research Kit, which is a clinical trial platform. So what is the environment today? What is happening in pharma? In digital health, it turns out the M-health market, the wearables market is supposed to explode, depending on who you talk to. It's in the dozens of billions of dollars in the next couple of years. As you know, we have a big data problem, as we have all these devices out there sending in data. In fact, we just did a 2-week trial with Garmin and a Zio patch. We have 9 billion data points. 2 weeks, 30 people. So accelerating pace of technology, shrinking costs of experimentation, and non-traditional participants like Google. As far as the patients, consumers are concerned, they are now used to a model where they're pulling information. We're not pushing information anymore, they're pulling. Same with physicians as well. The internet has become the court of public opinion, which is pro and con. We find that patients say the buying experience is itself the most important part of the drug experience, and 64% will trade their personal information for free services, which is very interesting. In the healthcare provider world, it's the same, a little bit of the same, because they're also consumers. From push, it becomes pull information. Many of them now work online. They use social media sites. And the kind of care that physicians are providing is going from acute care to chronic, ongoing care. or ongoing care in the terms of well-being, wellness, things like that. And today, instead of the physician driving the care, it's often the system. It's sort of part of the quality mandate and so on. And of course, everybody's pointing to places like Kaiser, which is an integrated care system, ACOs. And as I mentioned, the fact that we're going to this value-based reimbursement is driving both care providers and pharma towards this digital health area. Payers are saying that clinical trial data is necessary, but no longer sufficient, which is very interesting. It used to be that you do the clinical trial, you get approved by the FDA, you sell the drug, and that was it. But now, payers really want to see value, and value is interesting because it depends on how you define it. They're wanting to see real-world evidence and positive impact. And so the number of real-world observational studies has tripled in the two decades that are bracketing the turn of the century. And then finally, regulators, very interesting. I've talked with the FDA. Before I did Amgen, I was actually in a federal health IT contractor firm and talked with the FDA quite a bit, and we have a number of ex-FDA folks at Amgen. They are watching this whole area of digital health. It's becoming, I would say, a semi-professional healthcare area. The patient is driving a lot of demand, but it's not regulated. It's sort of semi-professional. They're getting devices that used to be professional devices, like pulse oxes and things like that, but they're getting it for the patient consumer side. And so the FDA is not providing a lot of guidance. I'm actually going to be on a committee with the FDA to try to see what they're doing with digital health, but they're kind of watching, and that's good and bad. Because if you watch, you're going to fall behind. People want guidance in the industry, and it's very difficult if you don't have that. So what's happening in pharma? It turns out that pharma is slowing down. In the last, in 2014, the growth rate of the top 25 life sciences companies was only 1%. That's down a lot. In 2009, it was double digits. So the blockbuster model is sort of ramping down. The average cost, as somebody mentioned, of a new drug is $2.6 billion, because of every 10 drugs in phase one makes it to the market. The cost of those 10 drugs is $2.6 billion. And recruitment and enrollment are 32% of cost, 33% of time. And 90% of clinical trials fail to enroll their target number by the established date. So this is a big problem for pharma, because as they're looking out, the environment is changing, genomics is coming in, personalized medicine is coming in. A lot of these previous models are not looking too good. So pharma actually is losing control over the value story because of the internet. The patients are online, blogging and tweeting, and so pharma is actually losing control over the value story. And for patients, the clinical efficacy is actually not as important as the ability to function. That's very, very important to keep in mind. And today, because of this value proposition, instead of traditionally selling inputs like efficacy and safety and unit pricing to profit centers, now you're selling outcomes and cost of care to cost centers. That's a big difference, selling to profit centers versus selling to cost centers. And as I put down here, the emerging hypothesis is that the minimal package is going to include a drug plus a digital solution around that drug, or what they call beyond the molecule, beyond the drug. And in fact, the new guidelines from AHA, American Heart Association and so on, include value. And impact on R&D, I don't know if you guys have been following legislation. The 21st Century Cures Act just passed. And what that is, basically, is it allows for pharma to promote cost effectiveness as an attribute of the drug, which it never used to be able to do, right? Because the law didn't provide for that. Now they can do it. Patients will have more input into these evaluations, and then eventually what's going to happen is that every subject, every patient, because they're collecting data, every patient becomes an N=1 longitudinal trial. And so I was at a meeting actually once with the head of ONC, and I asked her, what is this, what's happening with this semi-professional market? all these devices going out directly to patients and so on. And she basically said something really surprising. She said, we know that that's happening, the FDA is watching, but we're not going to do anything. And I'm thinking, well, that's good and bad, right? It allows innovation to flourish, but it also allows industry to get ahead of where it should be. Nobody knows the guidelines, so people are putting things out, and FDA is sort of waiting for something to happen. So we hope to influence that through pharma, through pharma consortia. So the question is, how can pharma add real-world value to drugs besides just a medicine? So here are some 10 ways that people have been doing that. I did a little bit of research. The first one is a lot of pharma has been putting out mobile apps. In fact, the 12 top pharmas put out 700 apps in 5 years. I don't know how much effort that took, but that's a lot of apps. Only 4 have over 100,000 users. So there's a lot of apps. In fact, you look at the App Store, you look for drug company apps, there's a ton of them. There are companies like Akili that are doing gamification with drugs, RX Universe, where you can prescribe drugs like a medicine. Prescribe an app like a medicine. There's all kinds of things that they're doing, apps with delivery systems, and I put a number of pharma that are doing that. So that's one big area, probably been around the longest. The second area is social media. Pharma is now starting to move into Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and so on. A lot of startups, of course, doing that, but pharma is starting to do that. Amgen is starting to do that. Clinical trials. I mentioned Apple Research Kit. It's interesting, we met with Apple a couple of times on this clinical trial, and I learned a lot about Apple's approach. Apple is very consumer-centric, it's not surprising. They're very consumer-centric, so their perspective is usability and privacy, which is not really our focus. So we had a good meeting of the minds, but as we go more and more into digital health, into the world of the consumer, this is the kind of focus that we need to have, which is very interesting. There are other platforms besides Apple Research Kit, but we see things like Biogen working with patients like me on a multiple sclerosis trial using Fitbit, which is a wearable, or Proteus and Otsuka, pharmaceuticals. They applied for, do you guys know what Proteus is? It's a digital pill, smart pill. So you take the pill, it has biodigestible electronics in it, goes into your system, dissolves, and it sends out a signal that you took that pill. It's a compliance mechanism, adherence tracking. So very, very cool. But then you're walking around with all this electronics in you, it's like bionics. So you can't walk through airports. So anyway, so they were going to do a trial with Otsuka's Abilify, which is an antidepressant. And the FDA, and both of them were separately approved by the FDA, but when they put them together to try to put in the same label, the FDA said, hold on, we have some questions. And so they're now going to retry that. And so, pharma is trying to add stuff, not just delivery devices, but actually digital health technology. The next thing is partnerships and consortia. There's some interesting ones going on. Patients Like Me is actually collaborating with a number of pharma firms, and I think they're doing great. They're providing a lot of data. J&J is working with IBM Watson, which is very interesting. When I was at Kaiser, we looked at IBM Watson 3 times. It's a very interesting technology. I think there are other things in the market now. Investments in M&As, there are 325 deals from 2014 to Q2 of last year, of which 28 were digital health deals. The most active was Novartis. Very interesting. Most investments are Series A and B, about 45%. New business models, Novartis just made news with its heart failure drug Entresto because it's providing it on a risk-sharing arrangement. Have you guys heard of that? Have you read the news? Where if the drug doesn't work, you don't have to pay for it. Very, very cool. This risk-sharing, that's what I mean. This risk-sharing model is very exciting because this is one way that you reduce the risk for the payer and for the provider. And J&J has a foundation that donated some open source software. So they're trying to jumpstart the software market. Accelerators of startups. Janssen has a whole startup health network. Johnson & Johnson, of course, has their J Labs, which you may have visited in the Bay Area. But there are a ton of other companies doing this, including mine, to start these little incubators and labs to try to see what Silicon Valley and everybody else is doing, and therefore try to, in a sense, bring in innovation from outside. Crowdsourcing, open innovation, Innocentive. Do you guys know Innocentive? They post challenges for the public to solve. It was actually started by pharma. Recently, Pfizer and Indiegogo. You guys know Indiegogo? Okay. They had this challenge for startups to do innovations for aging. And that's a very big area. So all these things, you know, the Innocentive, I tried to solve some of these problems. They're impossible. Things like, okay, how do you create a water permeable membrane that the drugs can, you know, I mean, you have to have some knowledge, you know, to do that. And, but they provide prizes, you know, $10,000 to $100,000 to $1 million and so on. Non-traditional players, very interesting. Google is entering biotech with Verily and Calico. And in fact, I talked with somebody at Verily. I think it's going to be very interesting because they bring a very different perspective. They see innovation from a very technology-oriented point of view, from analytics point of view. Apple, GE, Samsung, all these folks have medical, med tech type of initiatives. And finally, in manufacturing, have you guys heard of the pill called Spritam? It's the first FDA-approved 3D printed pill. They print it with liquid, powder, like that. So when you take it, it dissolves instantly in water for people who are afraid to take pills. So, but the interesting thing about that is you're 3D printing pills. Can you imagine someday when you know a patient's own pharmacokinetics, and you can print a pill that is tailored to that kinetic. So you can make it release slower, faster, you know, release it in different waves so that you can address the adherence issue and things like that. Very exciting, actually. Now, what are clinical trials doing? There actually is clinical trial activity with digital health. And as of September 2015, at least 299 clinical trials ongoing with a wearable. There are a couple of local companies that are actually doing digital medicine clinical trials. UCSF's doing it, Evidation Health, Scripps Translational Science Institute, one of the pioneers in doing digital medicine clinical trials. And also there are providers of patient data like Flatiron and Practice Fusion and so on that are providing partial data, not EHR data, but a lot of data for research and sort of recruitment for clinical trials. Most digital health startups fall into 5 buckets: administrative and cost transparency, cohort-based big data analytics, personalized medicine and quantified self, real-time healthcare, which is where I'm working these days, and R&D business processes like Science 37 that are running clinical trials. All these sort of general buckets for digital health. And this is the hype curve. Do you guys know the hype curve? Gartner hype curve, okay. This is the one for 2015 for digital health. Wearables are like at the top, the peak of inflated expectations, right? Just about to go over, And Google Glass is down in the bottom there. And you have health apps, you know, that's old stuff. But here you have stuff like, you know, ingestible tech, that's Proteus, artificial intelligence, all these kind of things are going on the way up. This was 2 years ago. And some of these things are already off the curve, have fallen off the curve. So where's the place for the most hype? Do you guys know? The most hype in one place was a Consumer Electronics Show, Las Vegas, right? It was just 2 weeks ago. I went. I forced myself to go, along with 175,000 of my best friends. So I'm going to show you a couple of things I saw at CES, just to be interesting. Again, like every year, you know, it was a zoo. You know, you had to have good walking shoes, and you saw people on the second and third day looking very, I would say, biorhythmically challenged. So here's a shoe from Under Armour. It's a sensor shoe. Okay, so it senses. It's for fitness, but it's for tracking activity, distance, steps, calories, and so on. Here's a CardioCore, which is a new kind of EKG band that you wear. So it solves the placement issue for EKG. Very interesting in a smart scale. Here's a range of items from iHealth. It includes a pulse oximeter, a wearable blood pressure thing, and a wireless glucometer down at the right side here. Same thing from Be Well Connect. They have the smart scales. People are starting to create these ecosystems, devices that even if they don't talk to other things, they talk to each other. Here's an abnormal breath sound detector for wheezing from Omron. Here's a medication adherence system called Pill Drill, and it just was announced this year. It has a whole system of alerts and detection and so on for basically elderly folks who are taking lots of medication. Here's an interesting one. This is a wand from Link Square. This detects counterfeit pills by using spectroscopy. So it's actually, you point at the pill, you can tell it's what it is or what it's supposed to be. So in fact, you could imagine using it for medication adherence. Very, very easy. What is this pill? And my mother said, well, she has all these pills. What is this pill? I don't know. And here's an emotion sensing wristband, good for physicians. Senses stress, senses emotion. And actually, this year, CES was fairly quiet from a digital health point of view. Fairly quiet, not too much disruption. Like I was telling somebody, my biggest thing this year was riding luggage. Have you seen that? Yeah, it's like a bag that you can ride on. It's like a little scooter. So you ride through airports. It's great. So this is the last slide. And I feel like this is what we're doing, especially online. So any questions? Any comments? Okay, yeah.
So about clinical trials, I just have a question. If in the middle or after a clinical trial is done, if a test becomes available that can provide additional information about the data that was already collected, how's that going to be? Is it possible to apply that test again retroactively, or how does it work?
Well, it's really interesting because I think that whole area is not well defined or have much regulatory guidance. One of the fears of the clinical trial is that it gathers data that may affect the registrational validity of your drug. And that's a big issue because, especially in late stage, when phase 2, phase 3, I found that my colleagues in those phases really are really reluctant because let's say the digital health monitor finds something that changes your conditions, that's very expensive. So we're tending to do these trials in phase 0 or phase 1, exploratory trials that you don't have to report to the FDA. And mostly we're learning about the process of how to do it. So like working with Apple, or learning about what happens with the data format. It's interesting, Zio patch, the FDA cleared ECG patch, turns out that their ECG output is proprietary. It's not easily translated. You would think that as a physician, ECG comes to heart rate. This one doesn't. So it's like, wait. So there's those kind of things you have to learn. And the data interchangeability, the security, the fact that we're using some cases consumer devices that are not cleared, not HIPAA compliant. How do you work around those? Those are big issues, and the registrational risk is a big one. And then the number one concern when people surveyed pharma that had done digital health was, what is your number one concern? Is the device data accuracy. That's the number one concern. Yeah.
So what is your take on adaptive clinical trials?
Mm-hmm.
What I mean is, typically you freeze after 6 months, 1 year, and
Right.
collect a lot of data, spend a lot of money, and then look at the data, right?
Right.
As we start collecting data real time,
Mm-hmm.
can we adjust? How does that look at it? What is your opinion?
I think that's a really useful, it's like software development, iterative software development. You build a little bit and see what happens. You build a little bit and see what happens. And that requires a certain kind of infrastructure. So we're looking at that. And that's something I think that a lot of people are very interested in doing, but I'm not sure that we know how to do that yet.
I had a question. where you are trying to find value-based approaches, or else the reimbursement doesn't happen. A lot of these apps, a lot of these monitoring devices, a lot of these things have inherent risk built into them in terms of liability. So I don't understand how, who is taking the blame? Is it the who's taking the risk? Is it the insurance company that is taking up this product saying, okay, well, this is good, it's gonna add value to our geriatric patients, but if something goes wrong in the monitoring or the value base, who is going to, who is the patient going to hold liable? Is it going to be the insurance company, or is it going to be the device maker, or? This is what I don't understand about this digital health revolution.
So it's interesting because obviously there are a lot of issues with using devices, that are subject to technical failure or misuse or whatever. Same as with medicines. I think we're leaning towards using sort of FDA-cleared devices because of the data, so that data is more reliable. But it's not, like you look at the healthcare system. Who's liable, let's say, if the batteries fail? Who's liable if, these are electronic devices, right? So who's liable if, there's an internet is down and you don't report a vital blood pressure, that was an outlier or whatever. I don't think there's actually any precedent for that, and I don't think there have been any legal cases based on that. So I think the best you can do is sort of, you have an FDA-cleared device that's supposed to operate the way it's supposed to operate, as certified by the FDA and validated by clinical trials and everything else. And then that's as good as you can get. And because of that, the payer will pay, because it's FDA approved as a package. And that's really the critical thing. And so if something happens where a patient doesn't get the right information to the doctor or whatever, and they sue, then we'll see what happens, if there's anybody who's liable, or if it's just, quote, an act of God or whatever, But
I'm surprised that
yeah.
doesn't happen though, because
Yeah.
there's 8,000 apps out there, there's digital products coming out every week.
Right.
Literally, I'm just surprised.
Yeah. Well, I think
it's
the
kind of scary for the entrepreneur.
Yeah,
to go
I think
out
the
there.
8,000 apps always say we're educational. We're not medical, right? So therefore, don't use this for medical uses, right? But you're right. The patient themselves, the consumer, like you and I, are going to use them, right, as medical devices. And so, we can't sue ourselves. So we've got the disclaimer, And in fact, in our clinical trials, we talked with Apple, and we actually put a disclaimer. This software may do funny things to your phone. You got to accept that risk. Sign away. It may cause your phone to whatever blow up. Whatever. So we had to put all this stuff in because, and that's what software companies do, right? They do that because they don't want to take the risk. So
Quick question.
yeah.
Do you know that 300 medical wearables that you mentioned?
Oh yeah.
Used
Yeah.
in clinical trials 299? Do you know how many of them are cleared?
Not very many. Actually, I just did a retrospective study myself of the last 20 years of FDA cleared 510K. There's about 69,000 things, of which about 7,000 things could be in the digital health area, of which I really found only about 180 categories or 180 products. So not a lot, 180 FDA cleared products that you could use in digital health. And I did that because I really wanted to find out who's actually on the market. A lot of these companies, been around for a while, they're out of business, or somebody bought them and didn't continue the product. And so it's not really 180. And then, of course, there are a lot of pending, people applying for 510Ks. Yeah.
One of the categories I hear a lot about is, the patient adherence to take your pill on time and all
Right,
the time.
right.
And if you invent something that accomplishes that, how do you get paid for it?
Well, I think the value proposition is not for the payer, but it's for the provider. Or actually, it could be for payer as well. If you can demonstrate the real-world outcome, which is the economic value, then they'll pay for it. So, for instance, if you go out and I've advised a number of startups, if you can do a study that shows that it saves hospitalizations, because of adherence, or it saves morbidity due to taking the medicine the wrong way, people will pay for it because it's so costly, and the alternative is so costly. So it is a good proposition, and people will pay for it. Yeah.
But you have to do a study.
You have to do a study, yeah. You have to have evidence, right. Yeah.
Okay, last question.
So, on the clinical trial space itself, we're seeing a lot of evolution. The paradigm itself is slowly changing. The evolution of patient-centered trials, and as Abhi explained, the pragmatic trials, and also the value-based medicine, right? So, how does a pharma company can demonstrate the value of the drug, right, to increase adoption and whatnot,
Right.
using the digital health options that we have in the market?
Right. So that's one of the reasons that you're seeing a lot more of these observational trials. So let's say they have a medicine, they have a market, and the payer's saying, this is awfully expensive. We don't really think that it's providing the value, compared to your competitor, So one alternative is for the pharma to come in and say, okay, look, we have this whole system around it. We're going to put in a call center. We're going to put in adherence system, apps. We're going to buy the patient a new house. So, no, you have to be really expensive medicine. So, there's a lot of things you can do to add value. That if you can prove it through observational studies and stuff, it's actually pretty compelling. If you can say we can provide a system that increases adherence by 20%, that's huge. So that's real value, and so they do their own economics calculations. Okay, how much is a hospitalization going to cost us if we do this, so on and so on. And I think quality-wise is going to help with quality also, and that's always important to the payers. But value is very much defined by the patient and the customer, just like any startup. And so you have to make sure that is the value they're looking for.